The summer of 2025 saw President Trump launch a sweeping new wave of tariffs, sending shockwaves through global markets and rattling investors from New York to Tokyo. The announcement, made during a high-profile White House press conference, immediately triggered a sharp sell-off on Wall Street, with stock tickers plunging as traders scrambled to assess the fallout. The impact was felt instantly across North America, upending established trade routes and casting uncertainty over the future of cross-border commerce. Freight trucks and cargo ships, once symbols of seamless trade, now faced new barriers and delays. At the heart of the policy was a dramatic 35% tariff on all Canadian imports, set to take effect August 1st. This move targeted one of America's closest allies, threatening decades-old supply chains that had long supported industries on both sides of the border. Businesses braced for higher costs and potential shortages, but Canada was just the beginning. Over 20 key U.S. trade partners, including the European Union, Mexico, and Brazil, received notice of new tariffs, ranging from 20% to a staggering 50%. The global trading system, already under strain, now faced a new era of uncertainty and confrontation. The Trump administration justified these sweeping measures as vital for national economic security and to level the playing field for American workers. Yet the sheer scale and speed of the tariffs were unprecedented, leaving economists and business leaders scrambling to predict the long-term consequences. No sector was spared. Tariffs loomed over everything from raw materials like copper to high-tech semiconductors to life-saving pharmaceuticals. Manufacturers and retailers alike faced tough choices as costs soared and supply chains buckled under the new restrictions. For Canada, the move was more than just an economic blow. It was a direct challenge to a vital partnership, casting a shadow over billions in cross-border trade and threatening jobs, investment, and the spirit of cooperation that had defined the relationship for generations. As headlines warned of a looming trade war, the stage was set for a fierce response from Ottawa. With public anger rising and calls for retaliation growing louder, a new era of economic nationalism was about to begin, one that would reshape the future of North American trade. At the heart of this conflict is the tariff, a tax on imported goods. When the U.S. slaps a 35% tariff on Canadian products, it's American importers who pay, not Canadian companies. The goal: make foreign goods pricier, nudging buyers toward U.S.-made alternatives and protecting domestic jobs. But the reality is complex. Companies must choose, absorb the cost, raise prices, or scramble for new suppliers. These choices ripple through the economy, often raising prices for consumers and squeezing businesses. Tariffs can help some industries but hurt others, like car makers who need imported steel. The result? Higher prices on everything from cars to canned goods, and a risk of tit-for-tat retaliation. That's why broad tariffs like Trump's often spark trade wars with far-reaching consequences. Canada wasted no time in striking back. The government moved swiftly, determined to show both its citizens and the world that it would not stand idly by in the face of economic aggression. The mood in Ottawa was tense but resolute, as officials gathered to craft a response that would resonate far beyond Canada's borders. On July 16, Prime Minister Mark Carney announced dollar-for-dollar retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods, echoing strategies from past disputes, but with higher stakes. This time, the tariffs were broader and more targeted, affecting a wide range of American exports, from steel to agricultural products. The message was clear: Canada would match every U.S. move, step for step. Canada also introduced a tariff rate quota to shield its steel industry from global market distortions, aiming to prevent a flood of cheap imports that could destabilize domestic producers. This measure was designed to keep Canadian factories running and protect thousands of jobs across the country. In addition, a targeted 25% tariff was imposed on steel linked to China, sending a strong signal that Canada would not allow its market to be used as a backdoor for circumventing global trade rules. These moves were both defensive and strategic, designed to protect Canadian industries and send a clear message to Washington. The government wanted to demonstrate that it could act decisively, defending its economic interest while also standing up for fair trade. Ottawa postponed its negotiation deadline to match the U.S. tariff rollout, signaling readiness for a drawn-out fight. This calculated delay gave Canadian negotiators more leverage and time to rally support from allies and stakeholders. The government emphasized strength and sovereignty, curating its tariff list to maximize pressure on key U.S. states, especially those with political influence in Washington. Every item on the list was chosen for its potential to create economic and political consequences south of the border. The swift, calculated response made clear, Canada would not be bullied. Public support surged as Canadians rallied behind their leaders, determined to defend their country's interests. The trade dispute was now a full-blown trade war, with both sides digging in. Tensions escalated as businesses and workers on both sides of the border braced for uncertainty and disruption. The economic and political fallout was just beginning, with ripple effects expected to be felt for months, if not years, to come. The world watched closely as Canada and the US entered a new and uncertain chapter in their relationship. The trade war's impact is immediate and personal for businesses and workers on both sides of the border. Every day people wake up to new uncertainties, wondering if their jobs, their businesses, or even their communities will survive the next round of tariffs and countermeasures. The effects are not just numbers on a spreadsheet, they're felt in paychecks, in family budgets, and in the daily lives of millions. U.S. industries reliant on Canadian materials, like aluminum, face soaring costs. Factories that once thrived on affordable imports now struggle to keep production lines running, and some are forced to cut shifts or delay investments. Alcoa alone reported $115 million in extra expenses in one quarter. For a single company, that's a staggering blow, one that ripples out to suppliers, employees, and local economies. Retailers like Balsam Hill, dependent on stable import prices, are slashing product lines and bracing for a rocky holiday season. Shoppers may find fewer choices and higher prices, while store owners worry about making ends meet. In Canada, farmers exporting to the U.S. face losing their biggest market overnight, with surplus crops and falling prices threatening family farms. Generations of hard work are at risk, and rural communities brace for the fallout. Retaliatory tariffs, while meant to pressure governments, create new victims among workers and small businesses. Many are caught in the crossfire with little power to influence the outcome. Even unrelated sectors feel the pain. U.S. tariffs on Brazilian coffee could raise prices for all coffee, hurting American growers in places like Hawaii. Consumers, too, are left paying more for everyday goods. The global supply chain is so interconnected that a tariff on one country can ripple across continents. A single policy decision can disrupt entire industries, from shipping to retail to agriculture. For many, the trade war means uncertainty, lost income, and tough choices. Families are forced to tighten their belts, and workers wonder if their next paycheck will be their last. The human cost is real and growing. Behind every statistic is a story of struggle, resilience, and hope for a better future. These stories reveal the true stakes behind the headlines, reminding us that trade policy isn't just about economics, it's about people's lives. America's tariff blitz has triggered a global backlash. The EU, facing a 30% tariff, is preparing countermeasures targeting $84 billion in U.S. goods and considering actions against American tech and investments. France and other EU members demand a strong, united response, warning that giving in would set a dangerous precedent. Mexico, also threatened with tariffs, is pushing for a diplomatic solution but preparing for the worst. Given its deep economic ties to the USA, US-Mexico Working Group is scrambling to find common ground before the August deadline. Brazil's President Lula responded to a 50% U.S. tariff threat with a promise of immediate retaliation, refusing to be intimidated. Around the world, America's protectionist turn is fueling uncertainty and strategic resistance. The risk, a cascade of trade wars, with unpredictable consequences for the global economy. The world is watching and bracing for impact. The economic toll of tariffs is already clear in the numbers. Rio Tinto, with major Canadian aluminum operations, reported $321 million in extra costs in just 6 months due to U.S. tariffs. Constellation Brands, maker of Corona and Modelo, expects $20 million in added expenses this year, costs likely to hit consumers at the checkout. The auto industry, with its cross-border supply chains, faces chaos and rising production costs, threatening jobs and investment. Even future-focused sectors are hit. A 93.5% U.S. duty on Chinese graphite could make EV batteries pricier, slowing the green transition. China warns that tariffs above 35% would wipe out profit margins for its manufacturers, underscoring the global reach of these policies. For companies and consumers alike, tariffs mean higher costs and shrinking margins. The numbers don't lie. The price of protectionism is steep. For U.S.-Canada relations, this trade war is déjà vu, only bigger and riskier. In 2018, Trump's tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum sparked a year-long tit-for-tat, straining a once-stable partnership. Canada's retaliation targeted politically sensitive U.S. goods, and the dispute left lasting scars even after tariffs were lifted. Today's conflict is broader. A blanket 35% tariff on all Canadian goods threatens the entire North American supply chain. The stakes are higher, with both economies still recovering from the pandemic and more vulnerable to shocks. The cycle of tariffs and retaliation has eroded trust and made long-term planning risky for businesses. Experts warn that repeating past mistakes on a larger scale could trigger a deeper, more prolonged downturn. History is a warning. Escalation comes at a high cost. As the August 1st deadline looms, uncertainty grips both nations. Tariffs will mean higher prices for families on everything from lumber and maple syrup in the US to oranges and appliances in Canada. Job losses are likely as factories and farms on both sides struggle with disrupted supply chains and shrinking markets. The intended protection of some jobs could destroy others, leaving both economies worse off. The broader fallout weakened alliances and opportunities for rivals to exploit divisions among Western democracies. The principles of free trade and cooperation are at risk, replaced by instability and mistrust. The outcome now depends on last-minute diplomacy, or a hardening of positions that will leave ordinary people paying the price. The world of tariffs is about to hit home for millions.